Right. Okay, so, well, hello everybody. Welcome to our room for the teaching perspective in quality assessment and the impact in the classroom. This is the final talk today in this room. And our presenter is Nick Glasson. Before we introduce him, let me introduce myself and my co-host. I'm Jonathan Cruz. I work for the East Asia Assessment Solutions team in the British Council. Jessica works in the Philippines. Jessica de la Cruz is my co-host. And let me just go through some sort of house rules before I introduce Nick. Can you please keep your mics closed until or muted until the question times? Any questions that you have, you can put them on in the chat room, and we can read them out, or you're welcome to ask Nick at the end of his talk. This talk will be recorded throughout, and also that's about it, really. Let's just introduce Nick now. Nick's talk is going to be left to their own devices, ? A study of an unmediated group online speaking task, some very preliminary findings. Nick has worked in the assessment division of Cambridge Assessment English for over 10 years. He's a senior assessment manager, and his role is to manage the production of test materials from commissioning to construction of live tests. His experience has covered a wide range of examinations currently or previously offered by Cambridge. He has worked on both a range of English language proficiency exams as well as teaching qualifications. He also has extensive experience of assessment consultancy projects delivered by Cambridge to ministries of education and related awarding bodies. Can't tell I'm reading this out, can you? Before joining Cambridge, Nick spent 7 years teaching English as a foreign language in Java, Indonesia. Nick has an MEd in applied linguistics from the Open University and is currently studying towards a PhD in language assessment with the Centre for Research in English Language Learning and Assessment, or CRELA for short, in the University of Bedfordshire, which is where I come from. Not the University of Bedfordshire, but Bedford. Okay, so on that irrelevant note, I'm going to pass over to Nick and let him continue. Nick, if we go, please.
Okay, thanks, Jonathan. Hello, everyone. So before we get really going, I probably need to just clarify what I mean by unmediated. In the context of this talk, unmediated refers only to the fact that there isn't an examiner that manages the task. So if anyone's been getting out their companion volumes of the CFR, please don't panic. It's got nothing to do with mediation, other than the fact that the examiner is not there to deliver the test. So I thought I'd probably just clear that up. The italicization of the very preliminary is just to highlight that this is a kind of snapshot, really, based on some very early data that we got in my PhD. So you've kind of heard who I am. I have a dual role in the sense that I work for Cambridge Assessment English and have done for many years. And I've also recently started a PhD with CRELA at the University of Bedfordshire. And as I said, all I'm going to be talking about this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you are, is just a snapshot, really. It's just one group's worth of data, and it's one particular feature of the interactions that was noted quite early on in my analysis. So it's probably good just to sort of speak a little bit. I don't want to spend too much time on this, just on the sort of context of the research. Obviously, I work in assessment, so one of the things I've worked with over many years is speaking assessments, and you can't help but avoid the harsh truth that when you look at many of the online speaking tests that are offered currently, such as Cambridge's own Linguaskill, they are often monolingual in focus, that there is no sort of dialogical element to the tasks. Although online speaking tasks can sort of aspire to target interactive competence, it's done in a kind of, sort of at one remove, because you're not actually getting two people to speak to each other. The construct of online interaction is as yet not much explored, but at the same time is becoming a reference point in models of language use. And as I've already mentioned, the CFR companion volume came out a few years ago. That obviously has new descriptive for the CFR levels for online interaction and things like goal-oriented interaction. So it's becoming more and more of a thing that people are aware of. But if you look at the literature in online speaking testing, it's still relatively unexplored. There have been studies, obviously there was a comparison of IELTS face-to-face versus video conferencing, and there have been other studies that look at virtual learning environments, but it's a relatively unexplored area at this point. And obviously given the situation we find ourselves in, it's becoming increasingly more relevant. Technology affords us a chance to create dialogic online speaking assessments. So we do have the scope nowadays, obviously, to create online speaking tests, which, if technology permitting, and this is probably where the internet will cut out on me, we can actually have peers talking to each other. So we can have candidate-to-candidate interaction in a way that we hitherto haven't really had. Technology also allows us to experiment with new forms of input. So part of what this talk will be about is looking at an established task and a new task that was developed by Cambridge, and how you actually, if you're using the technology and you're going beyond trying to seek equivalence with an existing sort of paper-based product, you can find out maybe how those things work. And obviously, as I've already mentioned, with the advent of COVID-19, online interaction really does warrant further investigation, because I think we've probably all been teleconferencing a lot more than we had been previously. And that's the same with candidates as well. So the actual study that I'm engaged in for the PhD, it's a mixed method study, but the primary methodology used is conversation analysis. I'm not sure how much people know about conversation analysis. There is a lot of terminology specific to it. I will try to gloss where I mention them, but if any of these terms are unclear, please put it in the chat and I can explain it later if necessary. I will try to keep it jargon-free. Basically, conversation analysis is something that has really enriched what we know about speaking assessment over the years, and particularly, for example, the interlocutor effect, where we can see the influence that different interlocutors have on each other in terms of their interaction. There are surveys and interviews, and I will touch upon that probably briefly at the end, that what we did in this study was I had the trialing. I then go through a process of sort of analytic induction where I do the conversation analysis on the samples. And then what I do with the subset and this group is I then present them with some of the transcripts and then ask them for their views on what they think is happening in the interaction. So there is a sort of follow-up interview. And as part of the sort of general overarching aim of this, I want to look at different interactive features in the online task at different CFR levels. So I haven't done this yet, but one of the things that's on the horizon is doing some facets analysis and getting a bulk of samples rated, so that we can then start to look at how, as you go up a proficiency scale, you actually can maybe see different levels of online proficiency in the interaction. So the focus in this study is on trialing a task which is online. It's interactive with a group of 3, so it's not paired or singular, it's a group of 3. And it is not managed by an examiner. So when we come to look at the task, I'll explain this further, but basically there is no examiner involvement needed in the task. And as I've already said, the aim of the study is to sort of explore the nature of online collaborative talk, inevitably via specific interactional features, which we'll look at 2 of today, at different proficiency levels ultimately. And as I've already mentioned, what I've done in the first stage of this study is to use the B2 first speaking part 3 task as a control, because although that's a paired task normally, it is actually open to being used with groups of 3. So this is actually the B2 first speaking task in part 3. This is the third part of the test. There are 4 parts. So in this test, there's a sort of introductory phase in part 1 where they get sort of general sort of questions and answers given. And then in part 2, there is a monologue task, which is based on 2 pictures and a kind of question prompt to focus them. Then they go into this task where if they're a group, they're given 3 minutes to discuss, in this case, how important these things are for keeping fit and healthy. And then there's a second phase of the task, which is 1 minute long, where they're asked to decide something. And then the follow-up to that is part 4, which is where they are given, the candidates are given a series of follow-up questions based on this same topic. But the thing that we're really focusing in on in this sample is the B2 first speaking part 3 task, because this is the bit where you have the peer-peer interaction, more so than you do anywhere else in the test. You have some of that in part 4 of the test, but you don't typically have as much, obviously, as you have in the group task. And obviously, as the name suggests, this is pitched at the B2 level of the CFR. And it's sort of, the scale that's used for this covers from B1 to C1. So it's quite a good task if you're trying to cover that sort of span of levels ultimately. And as you can see, they obviously have 5 ideas to choose from when they're talking, and they can bring their own ideas if they want to. Okay, so that's the control task for this initial pilot, and then the online collaborate speaking or collaborative speaking task, which is a new task that was developed by Cambridge a few years ago now. Essentially, this is where you go in and you put your name in where it says your name. Then it takes you to a check screen, which checks your video and audio, and also reminds you to have a notepad ready and a pen. And then you go into this info screen, which is what you can see here. And in essence, what the candidates do is they go in at the same time, they fill in their details, check their sound and video, and then they watch 3 videos. In this case, the 3 videos are a kind of advert for a drink called Differently Drinks. And you can see here there are 3 videos. One's called Countdown to Summer, one's called Our Promise, and the other one is called Out of This World. And they get 10 minutes to look through this. They can see the clock at the top here, which counts down, and then they go into a 3-way discussion. So as soon as the 10 minutes has elapsed, they're then put through into a 3-way discussion, and basically what they see is themselves on the screen, and then they see the other 2/3 with the other people's faces. So that's the online collaborate speaking task. They're given 10 minutes. Well, they were given 10 minutes in this initial pilot, which in itself is obviously a difference with the FCE task, the B2 first task, as it's now called. That's a 3-minute discussion followed by a minute decision phase. So the timing is different, but for this study, I wanted to allow them 10 minutes just to see what they could do. There's not necessarily an argument for shortening the time just because they might be lower proficiency. So what I really wanted to do with this talk is just to have a look at some preliminary findings from this. And so this is just focused on the conversation analysis, and it's only focused on the interviews, and you know, because it's one group, it's not a huge amount of data. So the group we're going to look at is group 2, and it consisted of 3 women, A, P, and I. Spanish, German, and Dutch. They were all quite long learned in English, and also they were all rated to be at C1 level. So they're pretty high proficiency level. But they're at that, for that reason, they provide a good sample for this kind of thing. So I've just put the B2 task up here, okay? And what I'm going to try and do is play the audio now. The audio on this face-to-face sample is a bit faint, so I will probably play it twice for you, just because then you've got a chance to adjust your volume as you listen the first time, and then you can hear it again. It's not terribly long. It's about one minute. As you listen, obviously have a look at the task. Have an ear out for how agreement is carried out, and also how topic shifts are introduced, particularly if you notice the topic being introduced. Okay, so I'm just going to try and play this once now. Jonathan, if you're there, can you let me know if you don't hear anything? Okay, because that would be rather embarrassing. Here we go. Now, talk to each other about how important these things are for keeping fit and healthy.
I think that sleeping 8 hours a night is very important because if you don't sleep enough, you can't really function throughout the day. So you need that sleep.
Yeah, I'm try with you. I think that if you don't have enough sleep, you can't go to your energy resources.
Yeah, I can totally see your point, and that helps you during the day to focus on what you need to do and to have enough energy to go throughout the day. And also maybe eating at regular times would be convenient to keep up your health, and maybe you have a meal plan and just the order of the meals during the day already helps you to get enough energy and to keep healthy instead of being eating around all day.
Yes, and it gives your body like a rhythm. It can refer to and knows it's so things are normal and doesn't have to worry at the moment.
Yeah, and I think
Okay, I'll just play it one more time just so you get a chance to hear it. Now, talk to each other about how important these things are for keeping fit and healthy.
I think that sleeping 8 hours a night is very important because if you don't sleep enough, you can't really function throughout the day. So you need that sleep.
Yeah, I'm try with you. I think that if you don't have enough sleep, you can't go to your energy resources.
Yeah, I can totally see your point, and that helps you during the day to focus on what you need to do and to have enough energy to go throughout the day. And also maybe eating at regular times would be convenient to keep up your health, and maybe you have a meal plan and just the order of the meals during the day already helps you to get enough energy and to keep healthy instead of being eating around all day.
Yes, and it gives your body like a rhythm. It can refer to and knows it's so things are normal and doesn't have to worry at the moment.
Yeah, and I think
Okay, all right, I won't play it again, don't worry. This is the transcript of what you've just been listening to, and the thing that's mostly of interest here is line 5. So we can see that before that you've obviously had the examiner setting up the rubric, saying what they need to talk about, and then I comes in and starts suggesting sleeping 8 hours every night, and provides a kind of rationale for that. You can notice as well the question marks in the transcript. They're not strictly questions. What they do is they indicate a rising intonation contour, which you probably picked up that I is using that rising intonation contour to sort of signal that someone else is, sort of needs to ready themselves to step in. And then in line 5, we have, yes, I agree with you. Now we have, yes, I agree with you, and we have, which is a kind of placeholder. And what it does is it signals basically that something additional is happening, something is underway that is going beyond the simple agreement. And what we find is that they say, yes, I agree with you. And then they do the sort of the sound. And then they have, I think that if you don't have enough sleep, you can't go through your energy resources. So what they do effectively is they provide an agreement, and then they sort of extend or elaborate on the point that has been made by the previous speaker. And then if we look at line 7, we have a similar thing. We have an upgraded version of that agreement. Yes, I can totally see your point, and helps during the day to focus on what you need. So again, it's providing a kind of elaboration of the idea, following an agreement token. And then we have a sort of 2 millisecond pause before we then see another topic introduced, which is verbatim taken off the task sheet. So we can see already that with the mind map task that's being used, you can see that the mind map itself becomes almost like an architecture for what they're going to do. It basically provides them with a means of introducing topic almost without any preliminary work done in terms of building up to the change in topic, or that it might be mentioned in passing. And interestingly as well, I can't really show you the embodied conduct here, but when A says maybe you eating at regular times, they actually did kind of do a sort of gesture towards the idea as it appears on the mind map. So it's almost like a sort of additional kind of cue to the other speakers that this is what we're going to talk about next. So it's all quite kind of carefully choreographed, and where we have these agreements, they're accompanied by a rationale or some kind of extension that elaborates or redefines the idea that's been expressed already. It's almost like it's a reappraisal of the idea. Now, this is interesting in terms of conversation analysis because actually, usually, if you provide this kind of extra information, it's because it's dispreferred. So the action that you're performing requires some kind of excuse because it's socially awkward. But in this case, what we can see is there isn't so much a socially awkward thing going on, but there is the need to provide more of a rationale for your agreement. So if we were going to characterize the agreements, we would say that they're often, the actual agreement token comes at the beginning of a turn, right? And it's often accompanied by some sort of elaboration or rationale or account. And if we were talking about the nature of the topic shifts that we saw just there, they're initiated within the utterance of one speaker. They're not something that's sort of collaboratively arrived at. They are relatively disjunctive in the sense that there is very little preliminary indication the topic is going to shift, and it shifts quite abruptly. And as I've kind of suggested, that's partly because the task itself facilitates that disjunctive topic shift because you're being given the kind of things to talk about anyway. So one of the interesting things about this is, why do you provide this additional kind of rationale? And you can look at this a number of ways. The turn design that we saw, you could argue that the first bit where they say, yes, I agree, is sort of other attentive. And then the bit that they elaborate in is more sort of self-attentive in the sense that it's their spin on the idea. But another way to look at this is how in CA, certainly, there's been a lot of work done, particularly by Anita Pomerantz, in how people handle assessments and agreements. So, for example, in this example, you can see that C says something about the person's relationship with their partner, and then the person agrees. But what they also do is they kind of re-specify the referent that is used. So that they're agreeing that they'd gone their own ways, but they are actually re-qualifying that with except we've had a good relationship at home. And it's arguable that actually what the candidates are doing in these mind map tasks is that the extension that they give is actually a re-specification of the referent in a similar way. Because if you think about the candidate, they've got two kind of interactive goals. They have to remain affiliative with their partners, but they also have to extend their turn. And we'll see in the online samples that they don't necessarily handle agreement this way, because what you normally do if you agree is you just say, yep, that's fine. But in this case, they're not doing that. What they're doing is they're saying yes, and then they're providing a rationale for their agreement. And often it could be characterized as a kind of re-specification of the referent. So what I'd like to do very quickly, I know I'm running low on time, is just to play you an example of what happens when a group of three has somebody who doesn't provide the elaboration for the agreement. I'll only play this once. This is a bit of CA heresy because I basically engineered this situation. I told one of the speakers not to provide an elaboration and to just do a quick agreement. So let's just hear this once. Here we go.
Do you want to start, Nick?
Yeah, okay, I'll start. I think one of the most important things is probably sleeping 8 hours every night, because if you're not sleeping well enough, then obviously that can lead to underlying health problems. I think that speaking from a personal perspective, the times I've actually had 8 hours sleep, I feel fantastic. But what do you guys think?
Probably does depend on the person, though. I know there's some people who say they can kind of get by on less than that, but I think generally you're right that the kind of scientific advice is that you should get at least 8 hours, if not a bit more than that even. Do you agree, Andrew?
Yeah, I do, yeah.
How about eating at regular times? What do you think about that, Nick?
Okay, hopefully you heard that, and hopefully you picked up that around line 16, this Andrew, he is asked, do you agree? And he doesn't say, yes, I agree, because blah, 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 blah. What he does is he says, yeah, I do. Yeah. And then we can see the orientation of the other two speakers in expecting a longer response from AK, because there is a rather awkward 4-second pause, which is an incredibly long time in a speaking task to have an empty space. And then AM comes in with, you know, sort of signs of disturbance in the sort of the nature of what they were doing with and then what do? Well, they pick an idea out of the mind map to kind of restart the discussion. And interestingly, if you look at AM's previous turn and the turn that I took, you can see that the mind map was very much used as a device for creating the topic. And also it's the same character, it's this, unwittingly, it's the same thing of respecifying the referent that's in place. I'm conscious of time. What I would like to do as a final lecture is just play you an example of the agreement that was occurring in the online collaborate task, which the same group took. And interestingly, it's worth noting that these two tasks were done within the space of about 40 minutes. So this is not as if there's a significant difference in time. So in this case, they are talking about which kind of video to go for in the end. Okay.
So I'd say we go with the first set and then cross out the slides and therefore put the content of the second one in. Not all of them, but just like a hint and make it more like suitable, like the format of the first one, not like a PowerPoint presentation, more like a movie to watch.
I agree with you, like to full extent. And cancel the third one completely. Like no,
yes, no,
we are not going to do
one
that.
Is out.
Yes,
not us.
No.
Okay, so this is very different from what we saw in the face-to-face mind map task. What we see here, if you can look at line 7, is that we have an agreement token, but what we also have is an upgrade to full extent. But then what happens is we achieve a shift to new matters, because the agreement is not actually it's not making room in the turn for an elaboration or a respecification of the referent. What it's doing is moving on the discussion. And in CA, there's a lot of talk of what's called progressivity, which is that when we're talking, we're actually trying to get somewhere. We're trying to achieve a social action of some kind. And it's interesting that in the online task, the candidates didn't typically waste time allowing for elaborations of agreement. They just actually went ahead and agreed. And a side product of that is that they actually produced more natural topic shifts as well, which I'm not sure I have time to play. I'll just play it very quickly here, if that's okay. Jonathan, are we okay for time?
Well, we're massively over, but
okay, all right.
it will impact on the questions a bit, Nick. We've only have one question or two.
Okay, all right. I'll leave that then. I'll just skip to the end. These are just some comments from the candidates themselves when they had looked at what they'd done in the face-to-face versus the online task. And you can see that they were very much aware of the kind of different orientations that they had towards these two tasks. And clearly a factor is that if you are trained to do the face-to-face task, you're going to do it in a certain way. And the sort of similar issues are raised here, that you know, they've been trained to always say why, and you don't just say yes, no, I agree, because that would be sequence closing rather than expanding. And in the online task, they didn't really feel that need to do that. And there's also the added element that obviously, because they're talking in a three-way discussion and there's no examiner present, even though they knew they would get a mark for what they were doing, there was not this sort of urge to try and impress with the language that they had used. So that was sort of where I wanted to finish. I'm sorry I've gone completely over, Jonathan. Thank you very much for listening. Do we want to deal with a couple of questions?
Okay, I think we've got time for one or two. Does anybody want to post a question or ask one directly to Nick? You warn them out. Okay, so where is the last one of the day? Any questions? Last chance. Where do you see the research progressing, Nick?
That's a good question. I think I've more or less decided at this point that I really don't, I think me and my supervisors have kind of agreed that there's not much point continually doing a comparative study of the FCE task, or the first task, sorry, as it's now called, versus the online one. I think the real focus should be on the online task and really exploring what it does. One of the things that we want to look at is, sort of areas around epistemics. So it's how people sort of negotiate their relative rights and responsibilities to being knowledgeable. Another aspect that I'd like to look at is deontic rights, which is the sort of relative rights and responsibilities to manage their interaction, because obviously in this case, they are not there with an examiner, they are having to manage the interaction themselves, between themselves. So that's sort of where I see the sort of next interesting sort of thing to focus on. I need to get more data though, so my email is there. If anybody has any good contacts or a hidden stash of language learners that might be willing to take part in the online task, then please do email me and let me know.
Okay. Well, yeah, and if you have any questions that you can think of for Nick, please.
Yeah, please feel free to send me any questions that you may have. I'm sorry I had to rush through a bit here, and I'm sorry, Jonathan, it went over.
No, that's fine. It's very, very, very interesting talk, and well worth listening to. So everybody, I'm afraid we're going to have to cut this short now because the plenary is going to be happening soon. So if you just let's say thanks very much to Nick, and we'll leave it there. And please, progress to the major plenary rooms and listen to the talks that are going on there. So thanks very much, Nick, and appreciate.
Thanks very much, everyone, for listening. Yep.
Thanks a lot. Okay, bye-bye now.
Nick. Bye.
Thank you.